From the main character being based on an old boxer with a rare disorder, to DreamWorks firing the voice actress who was originally supposed to play Fiona. Here are some things you didn't know about the Shrek franchise. Shrek is love, Shrek is life. That's the motto no one's ever getting tired of, but did you know that the famous film series is actually a book adaptation? You heard that right, it's even got the same name. Suddenly, the storybook pages at the start and end of the films just make sense, right? Along with the narration, and heck, even framing reminds you of a picture book at times. Though it's really surprising that Spielberg purchased the rights for the book to be adapted into an animated movie back in the 90s, right when it was getting famous. But he didn't change a lot from the original source material, which was a surprise considering Hollywood would do that all the time. Despite that, most of the stories and even the characters almost look the same, just a little less terrifying than they are in the books, though. Which brings me to a very important question. How do they turn a nightmare demon into someone that the internet weirdly thirsts over? Well, rumors say that the character of Shrek is based on a French boxer from the 40s called Maurice Tillet, who had a rare disorder that made his hands and feet much larger than your average Joe. But he was somehow loved by all. So you can almost see an uncanny resemblance, right? Whether that rumor is true or just a load of nothing is a whole other story. For all you know, it might just be a coincidence, because Tillet is definitely not green enough. But if he is the inspiration for one of the biggest animated characters of the past century, the filmmakers have done a pretty great job, considering it's been over 2 decades and no one can stop talking about Shrek. I mean, he's even become an Easter egg in real life. The green ogre is everywhere these days. You just can't deny that he's why internet culture is the way it is. But it's not only the internet that's been infected by him, the gaming industry can't get enough of him either. Whether it's for a quick gag or just an Easter egg, you've got Shrek featuring in some of the biggest games, like Madagascar Karts, which is totally not DreamWorks trying to beat out Mario Kart. That's not all, though. Shrek is also part of Tony Hawk's Underground 2. And for some really weird reason, the ogre's got a star of his name on Hollywood's Walk of Fame back in 2010. That's right. Turns out that animated characters can get those. At least the ones who are as iconic as Shrek. The whole thing was such a big deal that even actor Mike Myers, the voice of Shrek, went on the record to talk about it. Speaking of the actor, I have to say, he was really lucky to get the role, especially after a big shot turned it down. Can you guess who it was? Anyone? No? All right. Fine, I'll tell you. Apparently, Nick Cage was the studio's top pick for Shrek. Could you even imagine how different the film would have been if they signed him on? Or more like, if he actually wanted to be in the film? So what went wrong? And how exactly did Mike end up with the role? Well, Cage was all the hype back in the late 90s, and honestly, he had no reason to turn down a project as massive as Shrek. But the only thing that kept him from doing it was his fear of what kids would think of him after the film. Now, he didn't care about looking ugly or anything like that. Nick was just worried about people in the future thinking he's just Shrek, instead of all the great work he's put out over the years, which makes sense if I'm being honest. The only other option the filmmakers had after that was Chris Farley from Saturday Night Live. And honestly, with his comedic timing, Farley was a pretty great choice. Sadly though, his death in '97 hit the production of the film real hard. Turns out that the star was already done with 90% of the voice work, and of course they didn't have AI voice tech back then, so the producers had to do it all over again. And that's where Myers popped in to save the day. But his acting chops just weren't enough to catch up to Farley, so he had to do the whole thing twice. All because the first time around, Myers gave Shrek a Canadian accent for some reason. Though as soon as he fixed that up real quick, everyone was shocked at how good he was. And that's how we got the Shrek that everyone knows and loves today. Thanks to Myers and his great voice acting. The film was an instant success. But that's not all. Shrek actually saved DreamWorks from bankruptcy, that's right. The big green ogre really changed things up for the studio, helping them establish a signature style. With Shrek, DreamWorks was able to prove that the studio had a knack for telling stories, and that really set the tone for their future work. Not many people know this, but things would have been really different if the film had failed, even leading to straight-up bankruptcy for DreamWorks. But thank God it didn't. In fact, Shrek has now become one of the very early movies that started the whole CGI trend, along with Toy Story, of course. But at the time of Shrek's release, nothing else even came close to it. In fact, if Shrek hadn't happened, you can bet that films like Frozen or even Super Mario Bros. Could have never been made. So while it's lost in a bunch of memes these days, and that's all most of you probably associate with the franchise, you gotta know that it completely changed the game back in the day. All because the team behind the film was ready to take a risk. And let's not forget, Shrek was the first ever film to win the animated feature film category at the Academy Awards. The story is far from over though, because the first film in the franchise reached milestones that people never even thought were possible. I'm sure not many of you know this, but the first Shrek film is actually in the Library of Congress's National Film Registry. Let me explain this one a little before I get to the meat of it. So, back in 2020, the library took in about 25 films just to add to its collection. Some of the most legendary movies made the cut, such as Grease from 1978, The Devil Never Sleeps from 1994, The Dark Knight from 2008, and even Suspense from 1913. But one film that no one thought would have ever been part of the list was, of course, Shrek. If that doesn't prove the cultural significance of this movie, I don't know what does. Take that, Toy Story. I mean, there's no higher honor for a film. It's literally glued up in history, and you're never gonna get rid of it. Though I don't know why they didn't go for Shrek 2, that one dominated the box office for the highest grossing animated film when it came out. And it's still ranked in the top 20, which is crazy since it's been out for almost 2 whole decades now. Now, a franchise this successful is bound to make way for a bunch of spin-off shows and whatnot, and all of that did happen. You even had video games in the mix. But the most surprising of it all has to be the Shrek stage musical adaptation. You know, things really are getting wild when you've got a musical based on a green ogre and his love story. But don't judge a book by its cover, because the musical is actually just as great as the original film. In fact, it's so good that it won at the 2009 Tony Awards for its costumes, that not only looked like the real thing, right down to Shrek's skin, but the whole thing actually felt like you were watching the film come to life. You've got Brian Darcy James playing Shrek in this one, while Sutton Foster came on as Fiona. And trust me, when people saw Shrek and Fiona live back in 2008, speaking of Shrek's ladylove, did you know that she wasn't actually supposed to be voiced by Cameron Diaz? That's right. I mean, can you even imagine someone else as Fiona? So, turns out that the character was originally supposed to be voiced by Janine Garofalo. But this is where DreamWorks sorta becomes the bad guy. One day out of nowhere, the actress was told that she was fired, and the worst part is that the studio didn't even give her a reason for it. Talk about being disrespectful. Although the actress herself thinks that it was probably because her voice sounded too manly at times, but even if that was the case, at least give her a warning. But all's well that ends well, am I right? So, from DreamWorks firing the original voice actress for Fiona's character to an old boxer with a rare disorder being the inspiration behind the Green Ogre, these were some things you didn't know about the Shrek franchise.